team, please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Welcome to the Board of Health. Citizens' time. Is anyone here who is not on the agenda who has any issue or concern to bring before the board? Discussion, 29 Phillip Avenue, kennel license recommendation. You look like kennel license recommendation people. If you could sign in and please, give us your names.
It's the best line today.
Whether you live on Phillip, Sarah, or Myrna, we want you up here.
No explanation, Phil.
So, Associate Director of Health Inspections.
Hi. So I conducted an inspection on March 12th. They have 4 small dogs. The dogs are housed inside the house most of the time.
This is the Walshes?
Yep.
Yes?
Yes.
And I didn't see any reason why we couldn't get rid of them.
What kind of dogs do you have?
So we have, the new one is a Sheltie. The next one up is a Dachshund. And then the one above that is a Poodle. And the one above that is a Pomeranian. They're 11, 10, 8. And the other one's like 6 months.
That's great. Is Jerry Mills involved in any of this?
He said that he was gonna go over there, but he hasn't.
Okay, but from your point of view, there's really no issue otherwise? Okay. Any questions for the Walshes?
No. Thank you for coming.
Then
Thank you for having us.
Thank you very much.
the chair will entertain a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we approve the kennel licenses license for 29 Phillip Avenue, the Walshes.
Thank you.
A second.
Motion and second. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
4-0. No issues. What happens now, Samantha?
To the clerk's office, we'll send over our favorable recommendation.
All set?
All set.
Thank you so much.
Perfect.
Enjoy your
Good
dogs.
night. Thanks for
Enjoy your dogs.
Nice meeting you.
Nice meeting you.
Community Preservation Act presented by the Conservation Commission.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Sign in and give us your names, please.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, thank you very much for giving us this time today to speak with you. With me today there are 3 representatives from the Burlington Conservation Commission. The first is Jennifer O'Riordan. She is one of our newer commissioners. She is back here rooting for us. And the second one, to my left, is Bill Boyven. He's the vice chair of the Conservation Commission. And myself, Larry Cohen. Currently, I am the chair of the Conservation Commission. So we are here today to talk to you about a tax increase. Now, it sounds ominous, but before you have an immediate negative reaction, I'd like to tell you a little bit about it and get your comments. And if you think it is good for the community, at the end of the discussion, we're going to ask you for a vote of support that the Board of Health feels that this would be good for the community to vote to determine in a ballot question in April of 2020. So that's where all this is ending up tonight. So what we're here to talk about is a state program that's been in existence for 20 years. And we are a bit late coming to the party to join it. Most towns around us, I'd say 90% of the towns around us have taken advantage. And that means they have become a Community Preservation Act town or city. Now, what that means is this state program is a state program that essentially allows you to collect a certain amount of funds as a surcharge off your real estate tax and reserve them for 4 areas that are sometimes difficult to fund in a town. They are affordable housing, historic preservation, open space and passive recreation, and active recreation. These are areas that sometimes, for particularly larger projects, that don't often get funded because they compete with other priorities. So what the state did in the year 2000, what they did is they created this program and says, if you as a town agree to put a surcharge on your taxes and reserve these funds for that purpose, then as an incentive for doing that, we will provide you with a certain percentage of matching funds to help you pay for those projects. Now, when it began, it was like 100% match. It was a very good deal. Now, however, because so many towns got into it, and that the amount going into the state fund that provides the match hasn't increased, the percentage match has gone down. So right now, if we collected, say, $1 million surcharge, which would be a 1% surcharge on our property tax. And we'll explain in a minute what that means to the average homeowner in Burlington. What that means is that in November of every year, the state would just send you a check. And that means this check is, regardless of whether you do a project that year, they just simply send you a check. And so so currently, it ranges between 15 and 20%. So you might, depending on how much we're collecting, for $1 million, for example, a 1% surcharge, they would send you a check for $150,000, $200,000, independent of whether you actually did a project that year, because you could be accumulating them for, the 1 or 2 larger projects after 5 years. So that's what it's all about. Now, to date, 175 municipalities in the state have adopted the Community Preservation Act, and to date, none have backed out. You can back out. The voters can back out if they decided they didn't want to do this anymore, but no towns have voted that way. And you have the option, the way this works, just a few details on how this works. You have the option of assessing a surcharge. The voters can agree to put a surcharge on them, on the real estate tax, ranging from 1% to 3%. The most common is 1.5%. That's what most common. Some towns have gone as high as 3%, but the most common is 1.5%. And the trust fund that gives you the match is paid for by the real estate recording fees at the Registry of Deeds. And those fees haven't changed since this program was implemented. So if we implement this tax, then what happens is, what they ask you to do, the state law that enacts this CPA provision says that what you have to do is take 10% of the funds and put it away for active and passive recreation, open space purposes. 10% of the funds you have to put away for historic preservation purposes, and 10% of the funds has to be put in a separate account for affordable housing. The other 65%, or there's 70%, but 65% can be spent in any way you want. So what towns often do is they spend the restricted funds first, because that way they have the most flexibility with the remaining portion of the money. And then 5% can be devoted, which not all towns use, to your administrative costs to process how you're going to actually implement the local law for it. Some people, and rightfully so, may say that we can't afford any more taxes, that anything is too much. But the CPA statute actually provides for that. It gives the town a menu of 4 different exemptions that you can implement. You don't have to implement them, but a lot of towns take advantage of them so that the additional tax burden is less on the people who can least afford it. So some of the exemptions that are available that would be written in the ballot question are, you can have the first 100,000 of real estate valuation exempt. So obviously, if you own a small ranch house and it's valued at, say, 400,000, you wouldn't have to pay the first 100,000. You can exempt the first 100,000 of business valuation. That's less common. Most towns don't use that particular one, but maybe we'll have to see. Maybe that applies to us. The third exemption is that they give exemptions on your, if you are below certain levels of income. If you are a moderate income senior, okay, yes, a moderate income senior whose income is, for a family of 2, less than $86,000, you have the right to opt out. You don't have to pay the additional surcharge if you don't want it. If you are a low-income person, whether you're a senior or not, you can opt out as well. And you can, if you are less than, the HUD guidelines say this is I believe it is $68,000, $69,000 is the level for that. So the way most towns implement that, many towns do take advantage of that to lessen the burden on the people that can least afford it. What they simply do is when at a certain point in time, when the tax comes out, the tax bill comes out on the real estate, they include an additional form that says if you meet this guideline, you are eligible to waive that surcharge. And then all you do is sign the form and send it back in, and then you can be exempt from the surcharge of the Community Preservation Act. Now, the way it works in the town, there's just a few more details to mention to you, then I'll turn it over to Bill, who will talk about what types of projects have been done, just to give you some examples and so forth, and what we could possibly have done if we had this a few years back. Let's see. The legislative, let me talk about this first. The legislative efforts. There is a bill in the Senate, the state Senate, and the House to increase the percentage of the state match. What these would do if they were implemented, it is raise the recording fees at the Registry of Deeds, and so the actual match on your dollar would be 45%, which is a substantial amount of money. I mean, even 15 to 20%, the 15% that it was this past year, still you can't, anybody who invests in things probably would think a 15% return is pretty good, actually. So, but there is that, our senators, our Senator Cindy Friedman and Representative Ken Gordon, they have signed on as co-sponsors and supporters, and along with over 120 of our state legislators have actually supporting this. And so there might be enough support this year to actually get it over the finish line. All right, so now, just a couple more minutes on my time, for example, here. The way it would work is if this was voted in, the town would be obligated to form a community preservation committee. And it's be 9 representatives on the committee, only 5 are mandated. Be 1 from planning, recreation, conservation, housing, and the Historical Commission. After that, either the town administrator, however it's written up, the town administrator or the Board of Selectmen can appoint up to 4 more. So if there was something of interest to the town, let's say we want to really work on historic preservation, that was really something of importance, you might appoint an expert on historic preservation, for example. So that's how it's worked. So each year, many towns do it on a rolling basis. This Community Preservation Committee would evaluate proposed projects. Anybody can propose a project, okay? They would establish an application procedure, and if you folks, for example, had some type of a project in mind, either individually or as a board, you could propose a project to the commission. And they would establish a set of criteria to evaluate what the priority is for that year. This committee does not pick the project. What they do is they recommend a project, and then annually they go to town meeting, and town meeting says, either we agree with what you've said, or no, town meeting says we have other priorities, and they send you back to reassess and come back at a later meeting, for example. So, I think I've covered all the points on how it works to date. Over the last 20 years, I'll just close this portion of it to say that there have been 5,700, the cities and towns in Massachusetts, 5,700 affordable housing units. There have been almost 30,000 acres of open space that have been preserved. 5,100 appropriations have been for historic preservation projects, and there have been 2,200 outdoor recreation projects. So now I'd like to, and one thing I'd point out, which may or may not be obvious, our residents, every time there's a real estate transaction, our residents that buy and sell, however that works, we are paying into it at the Registry of Deeds as part of a recording fee. And over the last 20 years, we have gotten nothing back for it. Other towns have gotten that money that accumulates into that fund. We have not gotten any. So with your permission, I'd like Bill to make a few comments on how it's relevant to Burlington.
Thank you, Larry, and thanks for hearing us out again tonight. I have just a handout in front of you. You can follow along if you'd like. I'm going to basically go through it. Examples of projects that have been done by local communities and perhaps some that Burlington could do or could have done if they were members of the Community Preservation Act. The first is some examples of historical preservation projects that could happen in Burlington. First and foremost, is if this had been in place, the entire Grandview Farm Marion Tavern renovation project could have been funded by community preservation funds. And as Larry mentioned, you know, there's a certain fund each year. We estimate if we did the 1.5% tax in Burlington with exemptions, surcharge, not tax, that we would probably bring in $1.5 million, $1.5 million into Burlington each year. You don't have to spend all of that money every year. It's in a pool, and it can be accumulated, so you could accumulate money to do a $1 million project in one of these areas or something like that. Some of the things that we've seen recently in the news or in our work on the conservation, the Reverend Simon's house down at 121 Lexington Street. That's a house that is currently uninhabitable but is of significant Burlington history, and the Historical Society and the Historical Commission have both said that they would have loved to have been able to save it, move it, do something. Currently, there's applications to tear it down and put in some new houses there. The Stone Cottage and Middlesex Turnpike. We're currently spending town money to preserve our one-room schoolhouse, the town museum, the old burial ground, Francis Wyman House, those types of things that the money could be coming from a community preservation fund instead. Some examples of other areas in open space and recreation for some local communities, things like trail and boardwalk design. This is a section on boardwalks. $30,000 spent in Newton to feasibility and engineering study for a boardwalk in areas of budding conservation. $24,000 in Acton, construction of a new universal access boardwalk, wildflower garden. Universal access, of course, meaning accessibility for wheelchairs and everything else. What could Burlington do with something like that? The Vine Brook Aquifer, we're currently talking about converting and connecting to MWRA. And in the long term, we would stop maintaining the Vine Brook well field and eventually shut it down. So what would happen to that property? Hopefully, it would become conservation land as a valuable wetland resource area. But we could put boardwalks and trails and things like that to make it more open to the public. Where now it's kind of protected from public interference at all. But once it stops being a drinking water supply and perhaps is worth protecting in a bigger fashion, it could be an excellent source for CPA-type funds. We could do bike paths. You can see that other communities have done bike packs, as much as $116,000 spent as a feasibility study in Peabody to expand an existing major bike path. Perhaps Burlington could join and connect to the Minuteman Bikeway Trail that we've heard from a number of community members who would like to see that happen. Maybe possibly bring it to Third Avenue, possibly even get some kind of an overpass over Route 3 to connect walking and bicycles over to the landlocked forest. Those are the types of projects that community preservation could cover. Walking trails, again, this community, surrounding community have spent significant money on and had approved projects for walking trails. Burlington perhaps could do, I know one of Larry's dream projects is to have a walking trail in the higher length of the Vine Brook, starting in Bedford and going all the way up to Leahy Clinic, and perhaps even beyond, following the path of the Vine Brook as it flows through our town. There's a lot of nice, beautiful riverfront and wetland area along that way, and it would take a piecemeal approach of connecting different properties, getting permissions. Some of it's already been done at Leahy Clinic and at the district. Those two areas have already put in pieces of this walkway along the Vine Brook. If you go in the district, they have a very nice walkway leading over to Burlington's only waterfall, and it's really quite scenic in the back corner of it. But those types of things, again, CPA. Affordable housing is huge area for spending this kind of money. And it's interesting in that the way it can be spun, if you want to call it, when you write your proposals. Of course, you can buy some property and build some affordable housing and things of that nature. But some of these things, say like the one in Lexington, they spent $319,000 to finance a portion of the preservation of all rear exit doors and porches on their affordable housing unit. So if you write the project as preserving an existing affordable housing, you can put in new windows, you can put in new doors, you can help maintain the building under Community Preservation Act. So those are some of the types of projects to give you a flavor of what can be done. If you're interested in seeing more projects or exploring the database, there is a wonderful database on communitypreservation.org. You go into their CPA project database, and you can search on communities, you can search on any keywords. I just typed in bike paths to generate some of this data. You can see what's been done, and it's a good program to help you see that information. And to talk specifically about what is it going to cost the typical homeowner in Burlington, you know, one of the biggest questions you're going to get is, why do we need another tax, and what's it going to cost me as a homeowner? In a typical Burlington average property of about $500,000, the current tax rate in Burlington for 2019 is 1.048%. A 1.5% surcharge raises that from 1.04 to 1.06. It's not an additional tax, it's a surcharge on the tax. So, and commercial is currently about 1.69, 1.7, and it would go to 1.72%. So it's a small increase in the tax rate. And to put it into dollars and cents, the average property value in Burlington is $502,500 on that property. With this CPA, your current real estate tax is $5,266. It would go to $5,345 for an annual net increase of $79. If you use the $100,000 exemption on all properties that we would see most likely as being included to help low-income people have less of an impact, that annual increase is $63 per property, average property in Burlington, or $16 on your quarterly tax bill. So it is really not, I mean, my quarterly tax bill is $1,300, $1,400, $1,500, and an additional $16 is all that it actually would be increased. So it's not a big program, but when you talk about times all of the properties in Burlington, it raises a substantial amount of money. And some of the benefits to the community, and I'm trying to say why it would be of interest to the Board of Health. The things that this helps to support are areas that are typically last in line to get funds. I mean, the town has to spend their tax dollars on teachers and, you know, road work and paying the firefighters and the police department, all that stuff. These projects kind of get at the lower end of the priority spectrum. So now they'd have their own source of funds. And these are things that affect the health and overall well-being of the community at large. In addition, having a dedicated fund for the program for these areas mentioned will take that burden out of the town budget, leaving more money in the town budget for non-CPA projects like schools and sidewalks and, you know, Board of Health initiatives and other program areas. So it is I think it's a very worthwhile thing for the community, and I hope that we will get support from you as a board as well in favor of this proposal.
So, to wrap this up before, I guess, maybe we get to a few questions, is the timeline for this is that we would be going to the January 2020 town meeting for a vote. If they vote in the affirmative, then it would be a ballot question on our local election in April of 2020. Essentially, 1 year from now would be the vote. One of the advantages to this is that the projects that would be funded out of this Community Preservation Act are not subject to an annual appropriation like anything else in town, okay? This is a separate fund and doesn't have to be approved every year. The projects have to be approved by town meeting, but not the money. I mean, the money's indirectly approved, of course. So from the commission's perspective, we see this as a program that enhances the community character and enhances the quality of life for our residents. So the next step is the Conservation Commission has led, up to this point, an information campaign. And that means we have talked to the various boards, we've talked to the Chamber of Commerce, we've held a public forum on March 6th, so the residents could hear more about it. And we're at, what's that?
It was well attended and well received.
It was very well attended.
I was impressed.
We are at a point now where we have to move to the next step, and it's a big step. What has to happen is by state law, we as a commission are not allowed to accept funds for advocacy. We're not allowed to campaign as a commission. We as individuals can campaign for anything we want, but the state law does not provide us to actually go lobby for it and promote it and campaign for it and so forth as an entity, as the Vote Yes Committee. We can't do that. So the next step is to form essentially what is called a Vote Yes for CPA in Burlington ballot question committee, which is a real thing, okay? And you can establish that as the people that would. It's usually a citizens-led group, and it comes from usually all sectors of interested parties. And so what we're asking you to think about is, one, would you like to be on our email list for information? And the other, if you agree to be on the email list, the next thing you're going to receive is that plea for volunteers for time from just citizens, not as the Board of Health, but as an interested citizens who thinks that this would be good, who would be willing to sort of go to the next step. Initially, we'd have very few meetings. So the next 6 months, it's not going to be particularly intense, but starting 6 months before the election next fall, essentially it becomes a campaign to inform the voters and try to convince them that this is the right thing to do, like any other political campaign. And so if you agree, most of the other boards we've been to have had at least one or two people who have said, sure, put my name on the list, and which means that they are interested. And so we're asking, you know, if you want to make any comments that you would like to be on our email list, we'd be happy to put you on for information. So that wraps it up. Is there any comments or questions that we could field?
I have lots of questions. I read the CPA on the internet yesterday, and I have quite a few questions, specifically around historic preservation projects. I know in some of these here, the town has pumped into a lot of money, thousands of dollars into these, some of these, and we have got nothing out of it, and they're in private ownership. I want to know how that works. When I read it for the first time, because I was a little concerned about the fact that we have huge gaps in public health in this community that we need to, and the Board of Health and health projects and emergency was not part of this, so I have some questions around that, although you did answer one of them around monies that would be freed up. So I have a lot of questions, but only because this is the first time, and I thank you very much for bringing it to my attention. If Larry brings it to my attention, I read it. So, and I spent a lot of time going through all of the emails and reading it. But I still have quite a few questions, and I'm not sure how it really involves the Board of Health. But I'll turn it over to my colleagues.
So I will, so Title VII, Chapter 49B, Sections 1 through 17. I read it too. So, and I would encourage the town legislators, the town meeting, if they're going to be considering this, they should read this as well. It's not a hard read. The sections aren't that long. Section 5 is the one that really articulates what the purview of the Preservation Act, but it mostly is a bill about money. And I am very pleased to provide our sister commission the forum here, the Board of Health. I'm happy to have you here. You know we're televised. But I want to remind everyone about the mandate of the Board of Health. The Board of Health is essentially a municipal body. It's required by state statute and regulations to do a number of things. Oversee healthcare, disease control, housing development, hazardous waste, nuisances, smoking, food issues, mostly of our establishments, camps, pesticides. As I reviewed the Conservation Preservation Act, there's really nothing in it that has anything to do, as my colleague mentioned, with regard to this act. So this is really an issue that is for Historical Society, Planning Board, the entities that you mentioned who would be on your commission. I also reviewed the coalition site as well. And something our town meeting has to vote. I do not feel comfortable as a board making, and this is me speaking as chair, I do not feel comfortable as a board issuing any letter with regard to this act. I don't think the board has any purview over monies, taxes, and this is not something that really falls under the aegis of the board. As individuals, I would endorse whatever board members feel that they should support. But as an entity, I do not feel this falls under the Board of Health. But obviously, we support our commission's ability, or our sister commission's ability, to have this discussion in our town and appreciate its importance. Those are my thoughts as chair.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman? if I
Please.
can. So thanks for coming in. I found it an interesting program. As a citizen, it sounds like something I could definitely support, and would love to hear more about it. I think you gave a good overview. But I would agree, Mr. Chairman, I think that as it's not a program that supports health, public health, and we have no purview over the direction of the funds and what the programs are, I would agree that this is probably not something we would want to weigh in on as a board at this point in time.
Mrs. Walsh?
I would agree, but I thank you that you came forward. I have many questions too, Ed, but I think I would be, as a citizen, interested in learning more, especially what other towns, what I've read, what we have, it seems a lot about trails and conservation, but I'd love to see the other towns' projects in addition to what you have in this. It's a small subset, but I'd love to see that and see what we could for Burlington.
As an individual, it makes sense. You know, there are so many things here that I'm interested in, many things here for the betterment of this community. But when I heard my colleagues, I agree that we as a board have very little official capacity to approve something that really has minimal effect on us or the community's public health in that particular definition, as our chairman has noted. So, as an individual, I think it's very interesting.
We do understand the lack of direct responsibility and impact that you as a board would have on this. However, the way we were looking at it, that was certainly well worth our time to speak to you today, because you have that indirect, if not somewhat direct responsibility for the entire health of the community. And where 50% of the types of projects that are eligible for Community Preservation Act funding, whether you spend 50% of the funds or not, certainly have to do with things like getting out and exercising, with biking and bike trails and walking paths and all those things. So we feel it was worth it to come talk to you for that.
We are pleased that you came, and we are pleased to offer you the forum. As individuals, I think there's no argument whatsoever. As a board, while I definitely yield to the wisdom of this board as a whole, I would hold to my previous statements about offering any formal letter of support or non-support. We are pleased to have you here.
We understand. Thank you
That's
very much.
understandable, and to be frank, I can't envision a project under the Board of Health that you would propose that would actually qualify for CPA funds directly. That's why I mentioned the indirect relief of funds from the general budget. That would-
Which is exactly why I said,
Yeah.
when I read section 5, I think it's 5C, which was the large paragraph overseeing pretty much the purview of this. Obviously, sections 3 through 7 are really the meat of it, but section 5, there was really nothing that I could bite into and offer any kind of anything for the board to say this is something that affects us and we would have an impact in, and we should make a statement.
Very good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
so much.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for coming in.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for your time.
Environmental injury report. Good evening, Christine.
Good evening. One highlight from my report, I just want to reiterate that household hazardous waste is on Saturday, April 13th, 8:30 to noon, same place, 41 Terrace Hall Ave, in Francis Wyman Elementary School. Folks can visit our website for information about what we take and what we don't take. And one other update, we received an email earlier today that the full outdoor watering restriction is still in effect throughout the town, meaning that irrigation of lawns via sprinklers or automatic irrigation systems is not allowed. So that would also apply to people with their private irrigation wells.
We're already talking about that?
It's never been lifted from last year.
Interesting. Okay.
I think it has to do with the capacity at the treatment plants right now.
Interesting.
Because I do know that Vinebrook Water
I thought it
Treatment
was-
Plant is down
I
right now.
really thought it was lifted.
I thought it was lifted last year as well.
Yes, well, I really thought it was lifted.
No, I mean, I thought it was.
Yeah.
Wait, we were on a complete ban. Was it just turned back into
I think it's
the every other day thing?
The email that we got today says full outdoor water restriction remains in place until further notice.
Okay.
Okay.
No, okay.
Beautiful.
All right.
I saw that on
From the
another
DPW.
social media. but-
Thankfully,
yeah.
that's why you're the environmental engineer. Very good. Any other questions for our engineer?
What's the final report on the northeastern bunkers?
Interesting. So their structure, we don't have the final report yet, but I have a verbal update. their structural engineers decided that they wanted to, in addition to testing the concrete, doing an actual entry after they emptied them out and inspected them, they decided they wanted to do some structural integrity testing of the steel in the structures. And it's the recommendation, preliminary recommendation, that one of the bunkers be permanently closed and filled. And the other one can remain as is. So that's gonna be a lot of fill going into one of the bunkers.
And are they going to assess those bunkers every how many years?
I haven't seen the final report, I had a quick conversation with,
Because I've been waiting for the report and I
Yeah.
haven't seen it.
So how were those, if you know offhand, if not, maybe we can have a follow-up, but how was the conditions written? Because we required them to do a, structural,
integrity study.
integrity study. Was there some follow-up to, like, were they coming back in front of the board, or did we?
We could, that's at your discretion. So what I anticipate is, once I get the final report, I can either summarize it and attach it in my next report, and then you can decide if you'd like to have them come back and,
Well, I think it's worth it, I'm not saying I want them to come back necessarily right now, right? But just based on that information alone, I mean, we should probably have a follow-up conversation.
I think you're right. I
Yeah.
think, as you remember, we have been involved, and maybe you don't remember, we've been involved in the remediation and the investigation and the decommissioning of that Nike site for at least 30 years. And I've been part of that, and some others may have been part of that in this room. But I remember, and it's always been the question, are they gonna fall apart? Well, never did I realize or even think that, yeah, one of them has to be permanently filled. What does that mean with the other? And we kind of, a few years ago, said, let's get a structural analysis. We wouldn't want the cars to fall in. We wouldn't want anybody to get hurt. And never did I ever think that those 1950 bunkers, which were built to withstand, bombing or whatever, would ever need to be filled. Well, we're wrong. What does that mean for the other one now?
again, I just had
They
a,
haven't determined why they're not filling the other one?
I don't
Yeah,
know.
yeah, you don't have
I
a
just had a
full
quick
report.
conversation.
Yeah, I agree.
Because I was sitting at my desk in Northeastern, came across for some other reason, and I said, wait a minute, I haven't seen a final report on the bunkers yet. So I called up and he said, I was just talking about, we've got to finally, this report is almost done, I was gonna give you an update, so, once I get the report, we can either have them back, they can come back to the subcommittee, or they can come to the full board, you guys can make the call.
Is it within our authority to say, well, one is falling apart and you're gonna fill it, why don't you just fill them both? Is that within our purview? Or maybe it's unnecessary, but I just,
Yeah, I don't know the reason for filling one, but not the other, and maybe it's because the structural integrity of one is fine, and
They're stronger.
or the use above one is gonna be different than the use above
Yeah.
the other.
Right.
I don't know, I have to see the final report.
that, very unexpected,
So
thank you.
will you review it first as a subcommittee before bringing it back to the board? or-
I don't know.
Okay.
What would the board
I
want?
think what we need to
Yeah.
do is kind of take a
Get
look
the
at what the
report.
original condition was.
Right. Yeah.
Like you
Yeah.
mentioned, and go back and take a look at that. I believe it was written in there, I'm not sure what the exact wording in the original condition was, but there is some language in there saying that they need to come back in some form, whether it's to the subcommittee or to the full board.
Would this be an OSP opinion type of thing?
No,
No.
it's not an active, well, a different portion of the site is a closed MCP site, and it did not make sense to have an LSP review it, because we didn't really necessarily need somebody with LSP credentials. We needed structural
Okay.
engineers to look at, is this thing gonna collapse, are these things gonna collapse over time?
Just one more comment on that, too. I don't think that's a good point, where you said, well, what about further evaluation, 10 years from now, 20 years from now? that may be something that we might want to talk to them about.
That's,
If even have them back to talk about that.
well, I was thinking, are they questioning that one bunker because it's where it's located? Or is it just, it's a year difference that the other ones, or it's 5-year difference that the other one's gonna be structurally
Yeah,
have issues, right? So,
well, yeah, we'll have to look at it when we get the report, and then, as I recall also, Susan, the anticipation was that they would report back to the board in some format, so.
Very
Keep you
interesting.
posted.
that'd be great.
If there are no more questions for our environmental engineer, the chair will entertain a motion to approve her report.
So moved, Mr.
Second.
Chairman.
Motion and second, any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
4-0. Thank you very much, Christine.
Thank
Associate Health Inspector report. Good evening. Before you say anything, I am now on Twitter. What is our Twitter account? What is our Twitter?
It's I think it's at BVRC.
What's that?
Let me look. I think it's
Only
at,
because you're updating on a daily basis almost for stuff from our Medical Reserve Corps. I am not receiving that, and I want to make sure our town knows what our Twitter access is, so they can receive this information. I'm waiting, Director.
I will get it for you. One. So we are on Twitter and Facebook.
I'm not on Facebook, so that's why.
Oh, okay.
I'm a tweeter.
You're a tweeter?
I'm a tweeter.
Not on Instagram, no, we don't have any, not just
Right,
the
not
Twitter
yet.
and the, yeah.
Not yet.
So let's see. So it's at Burlington_MRC. BVRC,
At Burlington.
yeah, it's BVRC at Burlington_MRC.
BBRC at,
Yeah, so if you put in at Burlington_MRC, it should come up. And the name of it is BVRC.
Okay. All right, so we got that. So. Associate Health Inspector report.
All right, well, it's a pretty short one because I was just at the last meeting. But I wanted to update you guys and let you know that I'm working on an article about the animals regulations, so that people kind of have a good understanding of the changes and how the permit process works. They know what to expect when they come in for a permit, whether it's new or renewal. So that should be going out.
Great,
Thank you.
thank you.
Any issues regarding, I had also read about, you also review the newspapers for any issues regarding our food establishments. Any issues or concerns that we should be aware of? Thank you for doing that. I didn't realize you did that. So that's great to know that somebody is overseeing anything. And anything new regarding information from the CDC or DPH regarding e-cigarettes or anything else like that?
Not that I have seen.
Okay.
It's pretty much the
So
same.
you're keeping your finger on the pulse of all these things. So that's wonderful. Thank you.
I have one quick question. I know you're working very hard to coordinate the shelter drill. When is the date of the shelter drill? Do we have a date yet?
It's June 22nd. Saturday, June 22nd.
It's in a Saturday, so I can look it up. It's in June.
We're really asking the tough questions today.
It's in June, not a Saturday. So you have a 25%
Somewhere
chance
in
of
there.
getting it.
June 22nd.
And do we change the location, or is it the same?
So it's going to be at 61 Center Street because that's our shelter location.
okay.
So we're going to be doing the entire building.
Great. Hope we have parking.
So Sam's been working on the map
Okay,
and the capacity, how many cots we can actually.
Good, thank you.
okay.
Any other questions for our Associate Health Inspector? If not, the Chair will entertain a motion to approve her report.
So moved.
Second?
Motion and second. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
4-0. Thank you.
Thank you.
Supervising Nurse report. Good evening, Christine.
We had some past events. We had the BBC annual meeting on March 13th. We did a community preparedness presentation, I did,
which was outstanding. I'm sorry to interrupt, but it was
I heard-
outstanding.
I heard that,
It's on
too.
BCAT.
watched it,
I
too.
believe that they taped it. We had about 36 attendees, so that was a good attendance. We also had the rabies clinic on March 16th, Saturday. We had 31 attendees for that, so that was pretty successful, too. And I also confirmed a date for next year with Dr. Meehan. And
He's
working.
great.
Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Meehan. You're great. You're great. Thank you.
As of the March 15th flu report, which I'm keeping tabs on a weekly basis, we're starting to see that decrease in flu, actually confirmed flu, should I say, for Burlington, but yet the region is still showing signs of, similar and same kind of, on the graphs there because of the time of the year. So it's right on where it should be for this time of year. as far
I
as
also
flu
think a
season.
different strain is becoming more predominant too.
yes.
H3N2 is becoming a little
Yes.
more predominant, so people are still advocating for,
Right,
believe it or not, in March, the flu shot,
right.
if you haven't received it.
Yes. And let's see, we have started the blood pressure screenings for the Council on Aging. We're doing that now, 9:30 to 10:30 on the last Wednesday of every month. That's been an increase. We're seeing, last month we had 5. I believe we have 8 or 9 signed up for this, which is tomorrow. And we also still doing the blood pressure screenings at the library on Tuesday and the last Thursday of the month. And we have, upcoming events we have for the public. We have Until Help Arrives and in the Murray Kelly Room on April 3rd from 7 to 9. And that's going to be, Until Help Arrives. We also have the Burlington Police Department, the Fire Department helping with that. And then we have Stop the Bleed training for our BVC volunteers. And that'll be on April 11th. And that's going to be at 2:30 at the Board of Health and also on April 17th. So we're going to offer them an afternoon and an evening training, and it's train the trainer for them. And they have to sign up for that, so I just wanted to know if they're interested, they need to sign up. And then, of course, we have the health fair, May 18th on Saturday for the town.
I just have one question.
Please.
The health fair, it seemed to be increasing each year. Do we see more applicants to participate for the health fair this year? Have you seen an
I
increase?
think we have about close to 40 applications right now for vendors. Susan can probably,
We have a good number now compared to actually what we had the last year. They always come in at the last
The
one.
last,
Yeah.
okay.
Even though our deadline
No, that's
is
great.
coming
I mean-
up, last year I was changing the schedule a week before,
Okay.
but we hope that we'll be filled up before then.
Great, thank you.
And we have had a number of interns working on that. And we have another one coming.
Don't steal the thunder. We haven't gone to the director report yet.
Okay? I won't steal the thunder.
Great. Any other questions for our supervisory nurse regarding her report? If not, the chair will entertain a motion to approve.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we approve the supervisory nurse's report, and we acknowledge her terrific presentation in emergency preparedness.
thank you.
Fantastic.
I'll second that motion.
All right.
It's the best motion I've heard all night.
That is the best motion all night. Motion and second. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Aye. 4-0. Thanks, Chris. Director of Public Health report. Director.
Yes, so just an update as well on the annual meeting. We also had a vote for a change in the bylaws. So the executive committee last year had several meetings and really went over the existing bylaws and made some great changes to update them. We had that vote and they passed. So we have new bylaws now for the MRC.
So does the executive board is in charge of changing the bylaws?
Yeah,
So only the executive board? There's no delegates from the BVRC or anything else like that?
no, it just requires a 10% approval of the membership, which we got
Well,
at
that's what I'm
the
saying.
annual meeting.
Okay, so
Yeah.
there is an additional.
So
right.
they proposed the changes, and then it was voted on.
Yeah, okay, got it.
And then we also had an election for new BVRC executive committee members. So Carolyn Abruzzo and Jean Perry were reelected, and Mary DiChiara is the new member of the executive committee.
Great.
Yeah. On April 10th, we're having an active bystander training for the BVRC members. So BVRC members should have gotten that email out, and that will be a 2-hour training. Our animal regulations are now in effect. They've been published, and they're up on the website. As far as the intern goes, so we had Matt Jafari, he's coming to our April 9th meeting. He's gonna talk about what he's been doing in his internship. And next week, I believe it's next week or the week after, the first week in April or so, Neil Pandit, he's a high school senior. He's gonna be starting his high school internship with us, and he's gonna be here April 9th as well.
Great.
So he's also gonna be working on the health fair. He's part of the High School Medical Careers Club. He did a presentation at the health fair with them last year, but he's gonna do his own presentation this year. And then the Medical Careers Club, I believe, he's gonna work with them as well to do their presentation, so.
Beautiful. That's
Yeah, yeah.
Great.
Excellent.
So, tell us about Ray Avenue, Director.
So, as you can see in my report, I got a report from the DPW. They're still seeing grease out there. This is the first report that I've gotten from them since Bickford's has started using the protein matrix solution. We just got Bickford's report from Weston and Sampson. I just got it today. So I haven't really had a chance to look at that, but they saw a little bit more on the Cafe Escadrille side. I don't know why that is. But they're gonna continue with their regular schedule so far, and then we'll just have to keep an eye on it in the future. I will reach out to them again next month to see, what they're seeing then.
So
I
Bickford's,
don't, the dosing has not changed for Cafe Escadrille, because we have received the system inspection reports for them, so we'll keep an eye on their dosing and try to compare that to what the DPW is actually seeing.
because Bickford's looked clean.
They said they did not see anything coming out from that.
So is the, from a relative point of view, do we know, is the concentration of the matrix more or same or less at Bickford's than across the street?
The dosing would be dependent on the amount of grease that they have. So I think what happens is that Weston and Sampson will go in and say, okay, look at how much the capacity is, how much grease they have, and then come up with a dosing amount, and then kind of change it around to see what's happening, if they have to increase it or decrease it. So I don't know if you can compare like one to the other as
Okay.
far as dosing, because it's all dependent on what
I
they're
understand.
doing, yeah.
Is the DPW, they're still on their same schedule? They haven't
Yeah.
changed their schedule?
And there's no downstream effects yet?
No, I haven't, there hasn't been any
Okay.
issues or complaints downstream.
It seems, would seem peculiar if it's working for Bickford's but not for the Esquimalt, unless it's a administration issue,
A
which
dosing.
which we had last year, right?
Oh, so last year,
Yeah, the batteries, right, I know they
yeah,
fixed
it
that
could
one issue, but I'm just saying
be some kind
that
of issue,
a
or,
management of the system.
yeah, maybe with the dosing amount, maybe the dosing amount needs to be increased. And if we continue to see that, I think that that's what we're gonna have to do, is have a conversation and say, maybe you need to increase your
Which is fine,
dosing.
but why we need to have that conversations, like, they know there's an issue, let's.
Well,
the right
I don't know
dosage.
if
They may
they,
not
I don't
know
know
right
if the,
now,
the
right?
system
Yeah,
inspection
the
reports have been
protein
coming out
matrix.
okay.
Well, they
Would
know, yeah.
That's what I'm saying.
They're
Why is the
obviously not.
protein matrix getting involved too? I mean, wait a
So-
minute, I'm sick of talking about this, to be honest with you, so.
I mean,
So, but when the Weston and Sampson gives their system inspection
Right.
reports, and they open up the grease interceptors
Right.
inside, and they open up the one in the
Why is everybody
parking
saying,
lot,
oh, we gotta increase the
Take action
dosage?
it looks fine.
Why are they waiting for us
Oh.
to tell them to increase the dosage? Increase the dosage.
That's what they're supposed to
Yeah,
be doing.
I agree
Yeah.
100% with David. I absolutely agree.
what
Just
is
be
it
aggressive.
about?
But they're the
Escadrille.
they're the third
We have-
party though, so we
we
don't
have-
communicate with
Yeah.
the matrix, right?
Right, it's
Right.
yeah.
It's gotta be the protein matrix.
But if it's working for Bickford's in two
Uh,
locations
two.
now,
And But we have many other restaurants and series of restaurants in this community, and we don't see the buildup of grease, because they use.
Well, they're probably adjusting.
I think it's a
they're adjusting
management of the program.
You know, and
My point.
Escadrille has come in here, and they've been very, very cooperative.
Absolutely.
Very professional, very cooperative. Unfortunately, their grease is getting their fog is getting a bad rap because the system is not, first, the batteries died.
They're in the fog.
You know, they have companies coming in there and that they have hired as consultants, and the consultants don't even look at the batteries or whatever they did. You know, some dosing, it's a dosing issue.
No,
It's
I
gotta
think,
be
I
a
think,
dosing-
I think Escadrille is doing its due diligence, and we
Absolutely.
appreciate that. Bickford's stepped up to the plate, they're taking care of it. You know, clearly, we're in a better place on Ray Ave, but I don't understand why there's still grease coming out of Escadrille, and I remember when the scientist was sitting here, so I would love to understand from them why this is still happening.
I think we need to collect some more information and more system reports over
I
time
agree,
too.
I agree.
This is the
Because
first
one
time, yeah,
time,
right.
yeah,
maybe
one
they
time.
had an event
Yep.
and something happened,
I
you know?
get it, I get it.
And that's why there's, I don't know.
We
you
need
know.
a,
I'm just saying that we
history.
know that it's working in two of Bickford's locations, one in Woburn, one here. Successfully, they've been using it in Woburn for years, and I would tend to think that Bickford's is not low, you know, on fog, right? That they have probably a lot of fat and grease on a daily usage. Now, I know the Escadrille's larger seating and, you know, they have functions and all that, but.
And I will say too, the only really accurate way to tell is the cammering. I mean, this is just one account from
agree.
what the DPW
Sure.
guy out there in that
And
day
they're
saw.
not having backup issues at Ray Ave in the
Right.
last several months.
Well, that's the key.
Right.
The key is I'm very sensitive to the occupants on the end of Ray Ave who are
Totally agree.
getting backups. And as long as they're not getting backups, we can live with the play here of dosages.
But I'm also sensitive to our own DPW, who's, you know, relatively speaking, spending a good amount of time on Ray Ave when they have the entire town of Burlington to be concerned about as well. So, but I think all the players are doing the right thing. I really would like to understand, and I appreciate your desire to get more points of data. We've been with this now for 3 years?
But not with Bickford's though. So this, Bickford's just kind of started in with this.
No, I know. Okay.
I just have one other.
Any other
question.
please,
Yes, I do.
please.
Susan, can you just explain a little bit more about the complaint that you have with the children's hair services at the mall?
Yeah, so there was a hair salon that came in and did like a day, it was like
Oh,
a
okay,
day
just not
thing
familiar
of
with-
doing
okay.
children's
Oh,
hair at the mall. And a parent had called to complain that after attending this event, her child got lice. So that's not a communicable disease
Yeah,
with regards to the Board of Health standpoint. Board of Health does not regulate hair salons. So the Board of Cosmetology, the Massachusetts Board of Cosmetology does. So I referred her to contact them and to report it to them.
and this was just an event, it wasn't like a standing,
No, not, it was just,
I know we
they
have those
came in for the
portable-
day.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you for explaining that more, thank you.
Any other questions for our director? If not, the chair will entertain a motion to approve her report.
Mr. Chairman, I'll make a motion to approve the staff report for the Director of Public Health.
No second?
Motion is second. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
4-0. Any other issues, concerns, new business to introduce at this meeting?
Yes, please vote. Our town elections are April the 6th, and please come out and vote, and please bring your kids. We will be doing student vote again. We've been doing this for well over 25 years, and some of the kids who did that 20 years ago are now voting in the town elections. So bring your kids so they can learn how to vote.
In the meantime, we're still in the cold and flu season, so please wash your hand, isolate yourself if you're ill, seek medical attention if you feel that you require it, and just take care of yourselves and be safe. But happy spring and happy daylight savings. Motion to adjourn?
So moved.
We are adjourned. Good night, everyone.
Good night.